Hello, brethren. Great, brethren. How are you doing today? Today, as promised, I'm going to do it early. I'll give you about 30 minutes today, and then I'll continue on tomorrow. And that will be at 10, 11-ish. So, race and wrongful convictions in the United States in 2022. Give me a second. I'll be right back. Okay, so, and this is from the National Registry of Exonerations. So, you guys want to read the preface? I'll go briefly through it. The report is about the role of race in convictions of innocent people. We discuss the causes listed in the National Registry of Exonerations. So, United States since 1989, 3,248 as of this writing, describes racial patterns in the first 3,200 individuals' exonerations in the registry. Those posted by August 8th, 2022. So you can go check out the website if you want to. Okay, the first report of race and wrongful conviction, which was possible by the generous grant from Proteus. Fun. The number of exonerations were considered has grown by almost 70% since 2017, 3,200 compared to 1,900, which makes the pattern to detect more reliable as well as more current. Government misconduct and convictions of the innocent. Interesting report right there. We also know that false drug convictions, okay, finally we know more about false drug convictions than we did 5 years ago. Okay, including 259 drug crime exonerees, overwhelmingly black people, often framed by police. And we have additionally data on thousands of defendants, again, primarily black people, who were wrongfully convicted of drug crimes. And this is not just drug crimes, this is like a litany of different things. So let's get into it. Black people are 13.6, not true. But for this video, we'll stick with this number, okay, of the American population. But 53% of the 3,200 exonerations listed on the National Registry of Exonerations, judging from exonerations, innocent black Americans were 7 times more likely than whites to be falsely convicted of serious crimes. We see a racial disparity, varying degrees, for all major crime categories except white-collar crime. Yeah, okay, because it's much tougher for so-called black men to get access to white-collar jobs, and those that are actually given access to white-collar jobs, it's all about economics, tend not to be criminals. There's exceptions to the rules, okay? But usually they tend to be, model citizens. They just want to go to work and keep on getting them 6-figure jobs. Who doesn't? The report examines racial disparities in 3 types of crimes that produce a large number of exoneration: murder, there you go, sexual assault, and drug crimes. For both murder and sexual assault, there are preliminary investigations issues that increase the number of innocent black suspects. For murder, the high homicide rate in the black community. For rape, the difficult cross-racial eyewitness identification. For both crimes, misconduct, discrimination, and racism amplify these initial racial discrepancies. For drug crimes, the preliminary sorting that increases the number of convictions of innocent black suspects is racial profiling. I've been racial profiled. I was racial profiled on my college campus. right in front of pictures and stuff with me. But in addition, the registry lists 17 group exonerations, including 2,973 75 additional wrongfully convicted defendants, many of whom were deliberately framed and convicted on fabricated drug crimes and large-scale police scandals. A overwhelming majority were black, and you do have Mexican and Hispanics that were in certain areas like New York. They often get targeted too. When that paddy wagon rolls up, they scoop them up too, because proximity, and they just need bodies in those prisons in general. Innocent black people are about 7.5 times more likely to be convicted of murder than innocent white people, which applies equally to those who are sentenced to death and those who are not. Major causes of disparity is high homicide rate in black community. I do not disagree. Black people, well, that's proximity, crime by proximity. So black people will kill black people because of their environment, proximity, just like a criminal, a thief will steal from a black person because they're nearby, unless they live in a mostly white neighborhood, then they're probably still from white people. Like the families of those who are killed, innocent defendants who are falsely convicted are victims who are deeply harmed by murders. Of course, in addition, black people who are convicted of murder 80% more likely to be innocent than other convicted murderers. I agree. The convictions that led to murder exonerations of black defendants were almost 50% more likely to include misconduct by police officers than those who were white defendants. In addition, on average, black murder exonerees spent 3 years longer in prison before released than white exonerees. The number of murder exonerees have been increased, and many of the recent exonerees are black murder defendants. Shame, who spent decades with a D, not like the city I'm from, in prison. Most of those long-serving black murder defendants are exonerated by a handful of big city prosecutorial conviction integrity units, CIUs. Many of the convictions of black exonerees are influenced by racial discrimination. Okay. Most innocent defendants who are convicted of crimes are not exonerated. Judging from false convictions among death sentences, at least several thousand defendants have been falsely convicted of murder in America in the past 40 years. Oof. Innocent black people are almost 8 times more likely than white people to be falsely convicted of rape. The major cause of huge racial disparity is a high danger of misidentification of black suspects. I guess we all look alike. Assault on white women by black men are a small minority. There you go. Of all sexual assaults in the United States, but nearly half of all sexual assaults with eyewitness misidentifications that led to exonerations. Now, the others are from so-called black women. And again, brothers, I have the Brian Banks DVD. It's a Blu-ray. Brian Banks, I've never watched it. Don't have a Blu-ray player. If you guys want that Brian Banks DVD, please hit me up, leave a comment, and I'll give you guys an email address, and you can send me your information and I will mail it to you. Okay, I've never watched it. It's brand new, brand spanking new, still in my container. Okay, I'll send that to you. And that was not a white woman. That was a so-called black woman, and she ripped off the California education system, I believe for high school. It is what it is. A substantial number of convictions that led to rape exonerations of black defendants were marked by implicit bias. Implicit bias is a test that was created by Princeton and Harvard professors, and it's a fast test that actually judges whether or not you have some type of racial bias or prejudice. I've taken the test and I actually do not have it. Surprising. Basically what it does, it attacks your subconscious and your conscious, and the questions go so fast that you don't have time for your conscience to actually be able to register specific things, especially if you take it in a controlled setting where there's no one else there. Okay. And so-called black men tend not to have implicit bias, whereas white men tend to have implicit bias. So do white women. But I'm just saying. And that's the way the test is designed, to actually go deep into your subconscious. Black sexual assault exonerees receive much longer prison sentences than white sexual assault exonerees, and spent on average more than 4 years longer in prison. So drug crime, 69% of drug crime exonerees are black and 16% are white. Now, on most of your college campuses, you have drugs that flow like water in a river. And those drugs are brought in not by so-called black men, but by white people, whether it's medical pharmacology or whether it's hard drugs, cocaine, things of that nature from the 80s, 90s. You will often have white students that would distribute it, and they're very rarely incarcerated for it. Sometimes the student body kicks them off of campus. It's rare, but drugs flow through college, flow through it. It's like I don't even want to go too much into that. So the 60% is really strange. And then you have in the 2000s, you had crank and you had methamphetamines, and that was really big. And yet you still have a very low percentage, as the majority of drug users, majority of citizens in this country are so-called white. So majority of drug users and distributors are actually white. But this means that innocent black people are 19 times more likely to be convicted of drug crimes than innocent whites. Much larger disparity than we see for murder and rape, because drug crimes are almost never reported to police. The police who choose to pursue drug offenses, and they choose to stop, search, and arrest black people because you racial profile more. And that's what's called a preset stop. So when you have no probable cause, police will actually use preset stops to pull over people with no justification for doing so. They also use what was called Operation Black Asphalt, which they would target immigrants, specifically business-owning immigrants, and that would steal their money. Okay, they would just flat out take their money, and it would get lost within police funds and within police stations. Basically, it would just be put into the coffers of different organizations, police groups, things of that nature. And some of these innocent business owners, Asian, Hispanic, African, black, never got their money back. But I digress. Most false drug convictions, they were labeled as drug pushers, because a lot of immigrants usually take their money in cash from their safe straight to the bank. And sometimes they have to operate late at night and the bank's closed 10, 11, 12. And so they carry their money home. So they'll be profiled, stopped, preset stops, labeled as drug pushers because they had large amounts of money on them. Even taxi drivers had incidents like this occur. But I digress. Most false drug convictions involve comparatively low-level charges, sentences that rarely attract the effort necessary to obtain exonerations. Almost all erroneous drug convictions we know are in single clusters in Harris County, Texas. A unique practice for testing alleged drugs after defendants pled guilty led to 157 exonerations. 62% were black. These convictions are errors, mostly caused by defective field drug tests. We also know of dozens of groups of innocent defendants who were deliberately framed by police officers who planted drugs on them. Sprinkle crack on them. Shouts out to Dave Chappelle. Almost all were black people of other racial ethnic minorities. So far, 259 individual exonerees who were convicted of these fabricated drug crimes, primarily in 3 group exonerations. 87% were black, and what they're leaving out is they're black men. There are many more such cases in a dozen groups across the country. These numbers rise as we are able to add them to our list. It is no mystery why these outrageous programs of framing innocent drug defendants targets black people, guilty or innocent. Drug law enforcement always focuses disproportionately on so-called black people, black men, so-called black men. Of the many costs that the war on drug inflicts on the black community, the practice of deliberately charging innocent defendants with fabricated crimes may be the most shameful. So we're going past the introduction, and let's look at this is part of the introduction. So, exonerations by race, defendant by type of crime. Now, of course, you're going to see white collar is the lowest, and then you have art forgery, which is actually the lowest, okay, amongst so-called black people. But it does make a lot of money because you have a lot of art forgers. I don't see that on here. I guess it'll be in white collar. So murder, 1,167, white 32, black 55, Hispanic 12, other 2. And typically that's someone's biracial. They're actually coupling the statistics for biracial and Some groups, specifically criminal organizations that operate here, would be the other. Sexual assault, 33%, black, 59%. Sex abuse for children, 310, 6% white, 20% black. Yeah, so-called criminals that are so-called black usually do not engage in child sexual rape because that's kind of taboo, and you will usually get screwed badly in jail. When I mean screwed, like killed. Robbery, 151. Now, I know a lot of black people in my old neighborhood. Black people usually rob black people, so and I've been a person that's had his stuff robbed. I was coming back from college, and I actually had work stuff from my work study job in the car, and they stole that, including some other valuables, whatever. But there was a guy. He was a career criminal. He's been stealing since he was 9 years old. This guy from my old neighborhood. Hope he's in jail now. Doubt it. But robbery, 64% are so-called black, 19% are white. Now, there's far more robbery in the white community than that, but we'll go with it. 342 other violent crimes, 42 white, 39 black. Drug crimes, 16% white, 69% black, and that's 554. Wow. Okay. Yep. Of the 3,000 additional defendants who were wrongfully convicted of crimes in 17 large-scale police misconduct scandals were cleared in group exonerations. The majority of those defendants were also black. What explains this stark racial disparity? We examine the questions by looking at exonerations for murder, sexual assault, and drug crimes. Race in America is complex and disturbing, familiar yet often ignored. There is no one explanation for heavy concentration of black defendants amongst those convicted of crimes they did not commit. And we'll go down to this next subject. A major cause of high number of black murder exonerations is a high murder rate in the black community. Yes, that is sad. A tragedy kills many black people and sends many others to prisons. That's often from gang violence. So you have Chicago, 2 major gangs there, and then you have in California 2 major gangs. So it is what it is. But homicide rates alone do not explain the high number of black people who are falsely convicted of murder, or the length of time they spend in prison before release. Misconduct and discrimination also play major roles. Most innocent black defendants, black men, who were exonerated for sexual assault have been convicted of raping white women. Usually, you don't have black women raping white women. It does occur within sports, specifically like you have basketball, because you have a lot of lesbianism. Sometimes they can be predacious on younger girls. It happens, but and then sometimes in foster homes, if there is a so-called black woman that adopts children really for the money, that could occur too. But usually, there's not too many black women that are convicted of raping white women. I think the white women can really defend themselves off. I think the leading cause of these false convictions was mistaken eyewitness misidentification, the notorious error-prone process when white Americans are asked to identify black strangers. As with white exoneration, however, the leading cause is far from only one. Black sexual assault exonerees spent more than their white counterparts in prison. So, murder. About half of those who were homicides in the United States, those who kill and those who are killed, are black, 7 times the rate of the remainder of the population. One of the predictable consequences of this national calamity is there are comparatively high proportions of innocent defendants who are convicted of murder are also black. The high homicide rate in the black community accounts for, that's actually smart. So the ones that are actually doing the murdering, they're still out on the street, whereas the people that are actually innocent are in jail. So I guess they could continue to still kill if they're free to continue in malevolence and mischievousness and debauchery and murder and skullduggery and tomfoolery. The high homicide rate in Black community accounts for most of the overrepresentation of Black people among murder exonerees. Let's look at the racial pattern. 55% of all defendants exonerated for murder are Black people, usually men. 629 of 1,167, who make up 13.6. Again, I don't like that number because I know there's more than so-called 13%. One chart said 14.7. Another census chart said 15.2. So you're getting so many conflicting messages. So you're going to have to actually do your own research of the population of the United States. They say in 2010 that you have 45 million so-called Black people. So 10% of 350 million would be 35 million. And sometimes the numbers just don't add up. 45 to 46 million is what they said in 2000. Maybe a whole bunch of us died. Who knows? Of the population. For the population at large, that's about 7.5 times the rate of whites, who comprise 59.3% of the population. Also, not quite true. I have some charts that say they're at 60% to 62%, but tomatoes, murder than white people, and more than 6 times as likely to be killed in a homicide. Murder in America is overwhelmingly intra-racial. 84% of white murder victims and 93% of Black murder victims are killed by members of their own race. Again, much like we discussed, proximity as pertained to dating, relationships for brothers that want to date who they choose. It's about environment and proximity. So if someone's in your environment and in your exact area, then things will occur. So you'll be able to date them. And same thing with crime. Criminals are cowards. Specifically, your thieves, they're cowards. They're just going to steal from whoever is around them. So if you have a poverty of concentrated, you have a concentrated area of poverty, right? Everybody's poor, but those thieves are still going to rob other poor people. They'll rob your churches. They'll rob your orphanages. They'll rob your funeral homes. They'll steal poor people's pension checks that work in the factory. They'll steal poor people's social security checks. They'll steal widower that actually get insurance money. They'll steal the check payout from their deceased husband. Poor people in specific areas are often taken advantage of by thieves in their area. So it is what it is. So they're not going out to other cities to steal. They're usually robbing within their proximity because then they're going to get away with it. They can just quickly run back to their house. That's why police always scan the neighborhood to see who is the thieves. They look at the rap sheets of people in the neighborhood. They already know who did it, but oftentimes they have more pressing matters from theft, like murder. That's more pressing. Innocent Black murder suspects, especially who are falsely convicted, like the families of those who are killed, are additionally victims of murder committed by others. Those who have been exonerated spend on average 16 years in prison before their release. Innocent Black people are about equally overrepresented amongst murder exonerees who were sentenced to death. 56%. Wow. So you have 5.6% of every 10 death sentence. Wow. Those sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, 55%. So 5.5, 294 to 535. Those who were sentenced to imprisonment for terms shorter than life, 54%. So 5.4, 270 to 497. However, innocent Black defendants who escaped the sentence of death or life imprisonment received sentences that averaged 35 years compared to 28 for white. Yeah, that's bad. Whether you're white or Black, if you're falsely convicted of murder and you're not going to get a life sentence for your natural life or a death sentence, you're going to get 20 plus years of your life stripped away. 28 for white, 35 for Black. That's fucked up. Additionally, racial disparities in murder exonerations, homicide rates may explain most of the enormous racial disparity in exoneration rates for murder, but not all. 40% of defendants in prison for murder are black, compared to 55% of murder exonerations. Now that's crazy. About 30% of murder victims in the United States are white. The proportion of murder exonerees of all race who were convicted of killing white victims is somewhat higher, 46%. The concentration of murder defendants who were convicted of killing white victims is considerably greater among exonerees who were sentenced to death, 66%. Many studies in at least 15 states have shown the defendants who were charged with killing white victims, regardless of their own race, are more likely to be sentenced to death than those charged with killing black victims. So I guess the black victims' lives aren't as valuable. Since 1976, 75% of exonerations or executions in the United States were for murders of white victims. The disparities we see in our data suggest innocent defendants who are charged with killing white victims are more likely to be sentenced to death, and sometimes, no doubt, executed by those charged with killing black victims. Okay, one thing I know is that as pertains to feudal law and different executions within ancient Europe, they were swift with that guillotine in France and with the firing squad in numerous other countries of so-called white criminality. So they were much harder on white criminality throughout Europe through the medieval ages, dark ages, Renaissance ages, etc. Very hard on them. And many of your so-called white descendantry that called this their home came over as prisoners or criminals. So we have a high criminality just because of the exportation of a lot of the criminals from Europe. Those who were sentenced, though there are also sentencing disparities amongst the murder exonerees who avoided death sentences. Excuse me about that. More than half of the non-capital murder exonerees, the page froze. So, sentenced to life in prison or to life without possibility of parole. In other words, judging from exonerations, the pattern of harsh sentencing for murder convictions with white victims and lighter sentencing for those with black victims is not restricted to death sentences. If they avoid the death penalty, innocent murder defendants in white victim cases are more likely to be sentenced to life in prison than those charged killing black victims. The race victim disparity in murder exonerations also interacts with the race of defendant disparity. Only 13% of murders by black people have white victims. That's very small. Now, one thing that I actually want to posit, which is slightly off topic, is the cold case files with the lynchings, the bombings, and murders that are still open. FBI has a cold case from racial violence here in the United States, and they're in the thousands. So that number could actually be much higher. So, okay, let's go on. Misconduct and delay. Two racial differences in murder exonerations might help explain the disproportionate number of murder exonerations with black defendants. Misconduct. Official misconduct is more common in murder convictions that led to exonerations of black defendants than those with white defendants. Delay. Exonerations of black murder defendants take longer than exonerations of white murder defendants. Misconduct. 72% of murder prosecutions that led to exonerations include official misconduct that we know about, 847 to 1,167. Jeez. Wow. We may identify many different types of misconduct. The most common is concealing exculpatory evidence, often called Brady violations. After the landmark 1963 Supreme Court Brady v. Maryland, which occurred in 63% of the cases, the most common type of witness tampering, everything from misleading a witness in a lineup to threatening a witness to perjury. That means that these individuals are getting up on the stand and are willfully lying about specific events. Okay. Or they will lie within the context of audio recordings or official statements that are taken and recorded by audio tape or by digital tape. which occurred in 35% of the murder exoneration cases, followed by perjury by a state official. We know who those state officials are, which happened 20% in those cases. The rate of official misconduct is considerably higher among murder exonerations with black defendants than those of white defendants, 78%. Wow. So 500 to 638 compared to 64%. Okay. The overall rate of misconduct is a bit higher in capital cases, up to 73% to 78%, 105 to 134. But the difference by race is similar. 85% of black exonerees who were sentenced to death were victims of official misconduct. So 80, what does it say? 85%? 70% of white defendants of death row exonerees. Okay. Most of the differences by race are due to misconduct by police officers. The rate of misconduct by prosecutors is about the same for all murder exonerations, regardless of race, because they're all about the numbers. They have to fill those prisons with slaves. You know, according to the 13th Amendment, you cannot be involuntarily forced to do servitude or labor without a criminal charge being placed against you. All right. Then you can be placed to do whatever labor they deem necessary. You have a little bit off subject, but you have a system, which is a very predacious economic system that undergirds the prison industrial complex, and that is ALEC, ALEC. It contains your food, it contains your phone, your internet, it contains a list of different companies that produce clothing and shoes and things of that nature. Of course, they do produce office furniture for government, but a lot of your sweatshops that were shut down, they might actually just make those prisoners do those clothing designs and produce the stuff for Joe Smo and Jane Doe. Okay, and they can pay them pennies on the dollar. Perfectly legal. They committed a crime, they got to do the time. So they have certain amounts of people they have to actually put in these private prisons. You have shareholders that actually make money off of it, and they invest in ALEC. So a high rate of misconduct by police in murder cases with black defendants is reflected in the nature of misconduct that occurs. 84% of perjury by government officials is committed by police officers. There you go. It happens at 21% of murder exonerations with black defendants and 14% with white defendants. Witness tampering also committed primarily by police officer. It happened in 42% of murder exonerations with black defendants, 271 to 638, but only 25% of those white defendants. Kendra Scott and Justly Johnson were arrested with charges for murder within hours after Lisa Kendrick was shot and killed in Detroit. I remember this case. In 2000, was 1999? I know it was in 2000. Convicted in 2000. Antonio Burnett and Raymond Jackson had been arrested earlier. Let me go to the pictures of them. Okay, Raymond Jackson had been arrested hours earlier at the same investigation, and they were told by police and later testified in court that Scott and Johnson told them that they had committed the murder. Scott and Johnson were exonerated in 2018 after the victim's son, who witnessed killing at close range when he was 8, but was never questioned by anyone before trial, testified that he was certain that neither Scott or Johnson was a gunman. In addition, Burnett testified the police whooped him during an interrogation and that he was afraid that he would be charged with the murder himself. Man, that's an 8-year-old. If he did not say what they wanted to hear. So here's a picture of him. Boom. There you go. So that's from University of Michigan. .edu. Tainted identification procedures are a particularly dangerous form of misconduct. They occurred in 10% of murder exonerations. Okay, so in 1985, what is it? Mr. Fields, because I don't want to mispronounce his name, Matheson, a member of the L. Runk street gang in Chicago, was misidentified by members of rival gangs as one of the two men who gunned down two of their comrades in previous years. Fields was the only person in the lineup wearing short sleeves, which showed an L. Runk tattoo on his forearm. He was exonerated in 2009. Sometimes he used threats. A year after Charles Life, sorry about that, brother, was convicted of murder in Springfield, Massachusetts in 2010. A critical eyewitness testified that the detective repeatedly threatened to, his defective Freudian slip, charge him with an accessory to murder if he didn't identify Will Heat, who was acquitted in a retrial in 2013. So, let's see. Where does this end at? So this goes on. So I'm thinking I'm gonna stop right here. Let's see, where do we stop at? So we are going to pick up tomorrow on page, this is at 10-ish, 11-ish, so late 10, 11-ish. Yeah, we're gonna pick up on page 15 tomorrow. All right, brothers. So let's see where we're at. Let's see if there's any comments. Hope you guys can all hear me. So we got this first part. I guess we'll call this part 1. Wow, I was not expecting that to take so long. Let's see how much time is it. So, brothers, what do you guys think about that? If you guys want more of this, I'll be dropping. I donate money